join me today for the second episode of Culture Road, a show that discusses culture and contemporary issues. Joining me today are my co-hosts, Phil Berroll and Angela Mosely. And today we are pleased to be joined by our great guest, Dr. Cheryl Pahaham, who is an urban sociologist and a policy analyst. She's going to help us understand the recent elections and what it means for us going forward. Hello, George Orwel here at Culture Road, a podcast for culture and contemporary issues. With me today are my co-hosts, Phil Berroll and Angela Mosely. And on the hot seat today, our great guest, Cheryl Pahaham. Cheryl, because this is your first time, I want to give you some time to introduce yourself before we get started.
Morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Pahaham. I live in Inwood, which is a northern Manhattan neighborhood in New York City. I am a sociologist by training. I work in government, basically as a type of monitor and audit planner. And I've long been involved in local politics, in the Working Families Party, in my community, on the community board, organizing. We're suing the city of New York over a planned rezoning in our community. And right now we're waiting for a decision from the state's highest court on whether they will rehear our case, which could impact development all over the city. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. That's very good. That's awesome.
Welcome.
You're doing a lot. You're doing a lot, which is interesting today because we are just a few days from elections, actually 2 weeks from elections. And I guess all of us went through these emotions. I remember that last week or 2 weeks ago, when we were in the middle of taping, I was so distraught. And then one of was it Victor, who talked about Michigan going a different way than we had expected. And that just brightened everything. So I just wanted to find out from each one of you, how do you feel today? Because I know that we were feeling differently on the 4th of November. Angela.
I am feeling, I think I'm still feeling kind of like a little unsure because we're working with the toddler. I have worked with toddlers that are a little bit more mature than this in certain instances, but the back and forth, it's like you can expect something is coming because he's not going to give up. He just doesn't lose well. And I'd rather just go sit in the kindergarten class right now and just have a juice box with the kids.
Wow. I don't know whether they like that. It has really been eventful 2 weeks, Phil.
Yes.
And I just don't know how we are going to get. I thought we were getting out of this problem. I thought the elections were supposed to put an end to all this childish behavior.
Well, you know, as Angela said, you're dealing with a toddler here. I mean, I'm not worried about any of these ridiculous, frivolous lawsuits that he's filing. I mean, they're all going to be thrown out, and I'm more concerned about, you know, what's happening in Georgia with the 2 runoff races that will decide control of the Senate. Because, you know, if we don't win both of them, then you're going to have, you know, continued gridlock. You have a man, the Republican leader in the Senate, Addison McConnell. He calls himself Mitch in this pathetic attempt to be folksy, but his real name is Addison Mitchell McConnell. So I'm going to refer to him henceforth not as Mitch, because he's not my pal Mitch, he's Addison. So Addison intends, I have no doubt, he intends to gum up the works as much as possible, because anything that's good for the Republicans is, you know, in his mind, the only thing that matters. I see no evidence that he cares about the issues in any big way. It's really all about raw power. So if he is not neutralized in some way by the idea of, you know, winning these 2 seats, and you have a split Senate, in which case Vice President Harris breaks any tie, you can at least get a few things done. If not, I mean, I've read, you know, some accounts of there are a number of things that Biden can do on his own, but the kind of sweeping change we were looking for can only take place if you have that 1 vote majority in the Senate. Now, anyway, I think a lot of people are thinking, I know in the immediate aftermath of the election, why wasn't there a blue wave? Why wasn't there a massive repudiation of this man? How could 70 million people? Well, you know what? I said to myself, listen, I remember in 1972 when Richard Nixon won everything except Massachusetts. I remember in 1984 when Reagan won everything except, I think, the District of Columbia. Well, I had to ask myself, okay, would you rather be in a country where you're thinking, has half the country lost its mind, or a country where you're saying, has the whole country lost its mind? I mean, it could have been worse. You know, we have to remind ourselves of that. There was not, there was a split, but it wasn't even a 50-50 split. Biden won by 5 million votes at last count. He won clearly in the Electoral College. He won in several states that had not been Democratic, even before Trump came along. Yeah. So progress has been made, and I think we can talk maybe here in later weeks about the best way to move forward. But I think we all just need to hold on to that. If we feel somewhat despairing over the fact of, like, what were these other 70 million people thinking? I mean, that's a complex issue. But to begin with, they are not the majority, and we have to hold on to that.
Correct.
What majority is this? I mean, so it's good. You're eloquent on that, and talking about the fact that Biden won 5 million votes more than Trump, right? 5 or 6 million, whatever it is. And of course, they lost some of their expected wins in Congress. But should we be really, really happy about this kind of win? And to me, it looks like we have a split decision. And the question is, why is it split, Pam? Cheryl Pahaham? Why is it so split? I mean, if you think about it, 5 million more people decided that they looked at what Trump had done over the last 4 years and they say, yes, that's my guy.
It's really terrifying. And I have to say, I still feel like I'm in fight mode, that this fight is going to go on for a long time. I'm afraid for the future. And when you stop and think of how horrible this president has been and how much effort it took to convince voters, enough voters, not to give this guy a second term. We had to have a pandemic on top of all of the horrible things that he's done. We had to have 50 million Americans die before white America would decide, yep, this is too much. He doesn't know what he's doing. So that terrifies me, that it takes that much atrocity, that much violence, that much utter lack of empathy. And then the other thing that still has me feeling in fight mode is that Republicans have decided that, yeah, you know what? They're going to keep towing Trump's line, and they are going to keep questioning the validity of an election where the results are clearly not in his favor. The results are clear. It's an electoral college landslide, to use Trump's quote when Hillary lost. And it's a clear popular vote victory. He lost. They need to be quiet. They need to respect the will of the voters, and they need to figure out how they're going to work with Biden. But unfortunately, Biden is going to be hit from all sides. He's going to have to deal with the Republican Senate. It looks like it. I'm giving every penny I can to the Senate races in Georgia. And I have to say, with this whole election season, I have donated more to candidates than I have in probably the past 10 years of my life. Like, I never used to donate to politicians. And that's funny because I ran for office, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
but yeah, the fact that they are behaving so immorally and it's all about a power grab, it could be a good thing. It could mean that they really think their party is on the verge of extinction or really fracturing so much that they are not a power. But it also could mean that, maybe they're going to take a step back and start listening to voters.
Exactly.
And well, maybe Lindsey Graham will be investigated for his meddling and his lying. Maybe some of them in the Senate will be held to account. So there's some hope there. And on the local level, there's also hope because we're going to be having ranked choice voting for the first time
What?
starting in January.
Ranked?
Ranked choice
Ranked choice?
voting.
Where is that?
It's starting in New York City in
Wow.
January. And it's
Wow.
going to make it easier to challenge incumbents. It's going to make it easier for, really good candidates who aren't necessarily Republican or Democratic to get into office.
Right. Entrenched power is usually bad, regardless of which party. Even if you look at the Democratic Party itself, you look at, for example, in New York City, you're talking about entrenched power, and you're talking about ranked elections. It has so far been very difficult to get rid of incumbents. Up until, of course, this season, when incumbents just went out, went by the wayside. But some of them, actually, not all of them. I know some of them in Brooklyn that got kicked out. But I don't see a change in tactic at the national level, and I'm just wondering, what does this portend for the years to come, for the 4 years of Biden presidency, given that we have a wily guy called McCollum and the Senate Majority Leader, who just knows every kind of tripwire he can pull to scuttle anything that Biden may want to enact. And Biden, by nature, is very moderate, and I'm not so sure that his instinct for institutional leadership is what we need right now. Either way, you want to have institutional leadership, you want to have normalcy, but then how normal is it going to be? What is that normal going to look like in the middle of a pandemic?
George, sorry, go ahead. Sure.
I would say normal is going to look like having a national leader set some national standards on how we get through this pandemic and communicating clearly with incentives and punishments to states to make sure that they follow the federal policy, providing the resources, giving the economic relief that's needed to states and local governments. We had a president, and we still have this president, who resisted that approach. And so that's going to make a huge difference, that we will have steady leadership to get us through this pandemic. And other differences that Biden can make all by himself. Regulatory differences. Trump eviscerated environmental regulations. He gave away public lands to, people who want to drill, people who want to mine, So Biden is not going to do that. Biden supports voting rights. He's going to have a Justice Department that has totally different priorities than a Trump Justice Department. So there's just in tone and in policy priorities, Biden will make a significant difference. Obviously, that's not enough for the future because the Democrats face some of the same problems in terms of party unity that the Republicans face. We have a strong and vibrant left wing. There are a lot of young people who voted for Biden because they expect Biden to do something about climate change and to really get us out of this fossil fuel trap and stop subsidizing, oil and gas companies. So there's a mandate from young people. I don't know if how much Biden will be able to follow through on some of the demands from the left wing of the party. And he's old. So can Kamala hold it together 4 years later? Will she be our choice? So these are all serious questions, but even though I'm still in fight mode, I am relieved that at least every day we're not going to be hearing horrible news coming out of the White House, either through Trump's exercise of his discretionary powers or just his embarrassing, ignorant, racist posturing.
Yeah, I think from a health perspective, that may be good for us, Phil.
Health, you mean, George?
at least we don't have to deal with the emotions. The emotions that they used to deal with after hearing or reading about those stupid tweets. At least I've actually been feeling good the past 2 weeks.
George, it was such a relief to pick up the Times the other day look at the front page online, and see a headline that really, I mean, yeah, it was a lot of COVID stuff, which is depressing, but at least there was nothing about politics or about Trump. Nothing, just like, okay, it's as if, hey, we took a holiday from politics, and I'm sure we're going to see more of that going forward. And in that sense, there will be a kind of normalcy. But let me respond to what Cheryl was saying, because I do agree that, that there are going to be things that Biden can do regardless of the state of Congress, and also that I'd like to think that some kinds of actions that he can take, such as a coordinated response to the pandemic in conjunction with the progress that's being made on a vaccine, that he'll get some credit for that. And between that and hopefully the economy improving, that some voters will reward him for that. And that in itself will be perhaps a kind of a good thing going forward, for the party and progressivism in general. I think that, when we talk about the Trump voter, I think people often fall into the kind of the trap, the old story of the elephant and the blind man, that each one touches a different part of the animal and assumes that the entire animal looks like that.
Yeah.
Trump voters are really not monolithic. Everything that I've studied over the last 4 years have indicated that. You do have the hardcore haters, the white nationalists, the homophobes and anti-Semites and xenophobes and so forth. You do have some people who are so fixated on a single issue, whether it's abortion or I know a Jewish couple who are just, so hung up on Israel and do not we're angry at Obama for criticizing Netanyahu in the mildest terms, that they went to Trump for that reason. You have people who are still big on guns. You have other people who just feel that as religious conservatives, they feel that the country is becoming too secular, and that liberals are anti-religion and this nonsense. And I do think there are a certain number of people who, and we can, judge them any way we want. You can say, how can you be so blind? How could you ignore all this other stuff? They only focused on the economy. They focused on, what? If it wasn't for the pandemic, the economy was, humming along smoothly. I mean, kind of what Cheryl was saying before, that I think the pandemic, if it hadn't been for the pandemic, you would have had more of those people perhaps going for Trump, because the only thing they looked at was this kind of bottom line of, okay, the economy's doing well, I'm doing well, my family's doing well,
Right.
I don't really care about the other stuff. And you know what, as I said, we can look on that as a kind of tunnel vision and say, like, how could you ignore what he was doing to the Constitution and the racism and the tweets and all that? But you can also say, look, there are people in this country who, still feel they don't have time for politics, who feel like, look, I have to be concerned with my and my family's economic survival. I look at the economy, okay, it's doing well, that's what I vote on. Now, the upside of that is that if the economy does do well under Biden, again, those people potentially could come back over to the Democratic side. Because again, if that's the main thing they vote on, and we find that, hey, we've come out of the pandemic, the economy is stronger than ever, that's going to influence their decision. And hopefully, they'll be choosing more candidates that, when in office, will advance the kind of vision that we've been talking about. There's no guarantee of that, but I'm, a hopeless optimist.
Angela, let me bring you into this discussion. You're talking, I was reading yesterday a columnist in the New York Times, Jamal Bowie, and he was talking about the same thing, although he's talked about it differently. His point was that Trump may have gotten, I think it was this morning, may have gotten a lot of people just because of those checks that he sent out in his name, those government checks, $1,200 and then up over $100.
Right.
Which that he got black votes because he bought black people, but I don't know whether you're buying this economic argument. If anything, 4 years ago the country was not so bad, at least for a number of people relative to 2008, and still the economy wasn't an issue. I think that I was wondering, the economy as an election issue was there in 1992. It was there in 2008. I'm not so sure it was there in 2012, or rather 2016. It was there in 2012. I remember that very well. But then this year, where do you come down on this?
one thing that I think a lot of people miss for whatever reason, because they don't really know a lot of the behind the stories. I think a lot of people fail to realize that Trump was coming into an administration, and the policies that was set in action prior to him, with President Obama's administration, he was coming into that era. So the economy and, jobs were, doing well and coming back then. And then when he came into the office, everything just tanked, in my opinion. Like, he just blew everything up on a lot of different levels. And when we talk specifically, I talk a great deal or connect a lot with the younger generation and their thoughts on what happened, and a lot of them that are coming out of college and the debt that they're in, can't find jobs in the careers or fields that they're, went to school for. When I talk to them, that was why a lot of them, among other things, chose to go the Biden ticket, because the debt, after, the Department of Education, the woman that was set into office on that ticket, oh my gosh, she has done so much craziness with the Department of Education. And a lot of young people were recognizing that. A lot of them were, especially on the higher ed side, and promises that were made in terms of, like, you'll get out of this discipline and you'll have a job and different things like that. A lot of them were unable to get careers in the fields that they were going to school for, but they had accrued a lot of debt with them going to college. So the promises that were made to them about, going to get your 4-year education and getting your degrees, it wasn't living up to all the hype that it was being set. So a lot of them had their eyes open to where the economy was, what was really going on. So the ones that I have talked to, they weren't really fooled about what Trump's administration was saying about the economy, about jobs and different things. And then also on another side, when you start looking at some of the stuff that he was doing, getting out of agreements and deals overseas, like, he was just tearing and just dismantling a lot of stuff that has been in effect years before him. And so people that I have talked to, like I said, particularly the younger generation, they had seen this in action, and a lot of them took to social media, which I think was a wonderful thing. Especially, I had never been really on TikTok, but a lot of them had took to TikTok and started posting videos and were, spitting a lot of knowledge about their perspective and history. And they were I was very amazed and was very much hopeful for the younger generation, because I was a little worried about them, but it started to look really, really good.
Yeah, I think this was a TikTok election rather than a Facebook election this time.
Yeah.
One of the things that is worrying, of course, is that he has gone AWOL on COVID. And I think the Biden campaign decided to concentrate on health, public health, and I think I don't know to what extent that was successful, but to me that was a very wise decision to be talking about COVID, because this administration really forgot what they're supposed to be doing for the benefit for the rest of us, and that is going to affect us going forward. And which now allows me to move on to segue into this COVID thing. It seems to me that the Midwest is now seeing a second wave that is more lethal than previously, and there are governors who are changing their positions, and I'm talking about Iowa Governor Reynolds. There are others who are moving slowly toward, some kind of sense of sanity. But this is not also something that is easily understood, because I've seen a lot of liberals as well concerned about, closures, because it's really hard to be indoors. Chicago is in the middle of a huge wave.
Yes.
Give us some update on that. And then what's your view regarding what should happen going forward?
Being in Chicago, some of the stuff that's coming out, especially on the media, and being here, actually, it seems like it's a night and day type of thing. Because first of all, the mayor, she is not playing games at all here. I love her.
My life.
Mayor Lightfoot, she is not playing games. She is issuing citations. She is doing everything that she possibly can to keep Chicago safe, and I really appreciate that. Of her. She has had to, go against the governor because the governor was wanting to keep certain, because he wanted to like fully shut down the whole the area.
Oh,
And
and they're
yeah,
supposed to be in tune because they're both Democrats.
yes, but they're butting heads on some certain things because, specifically she was looking at some of the businesses that were around the Chicago area and wanted to keep it open a little bit longer because of businesses purposes. A lot of the small businesses, end up losing their locations or losing their businesses. So she was trying to help out on that front. But for the most part, the things that she has set in order and her administration have really been supportive of her and the things that she has enacted in Chicago. So Chicago has been on that part faring fairly well. The challenges that I think that has been a major thing here in Chicago is the younger folks. They are tired of being locked up. I understand that. However, I appreciate the code because the code is about to keep them in the house, and Chicago's code is different than anything else. So I think they're going to support her on that one.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Someone went to school in Chicago, Angela. I second your. I remember that. They don't call it the
different kind of code.
Yeah. Cheryl Pahaham, I'm wondering, with this situation, New York is not out of the woods yet. Actually, the situation is getting even, back to bad old days, right? Back to where we were a couple of months ago. And this is a city that does not do well without business. This is a business city. This is the quintessential part of New York is Wall Street, but also smaller businesses. And I'm wondering what you think about the way forward. What is going to happen? For the first time, I saw Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio agree on a few other things. What do you think?
Well, I think being indoors, having these shutdowns and continuing with these partial shutdowns has been devastating in so many ways, especially in the context of any of us not getting the federal aid that we need. I have a friend she's German, and she said in Germany, the government actually paid employers to remain open and pay the wages of their workers, even though people weren't necessarily working. The businesses wouldn't shut down and people would have income. We didn't have anything like that here. It was very selective, targeted aid. And you saw initially that, big corporations were getting a lot of the federal relief. So you have that absence of economic support from the federal government and the shutdown, which has a social impact and an economic impact. So much of our lives in New York City are outside. We're going to a market, where we're interacting with people socially, people who are different from us. We are taking our kids to sporting events in the parks, or we're going in the parks and engaging in sporting events. We go to plazas and we sit around and listen to music and drink coffee. And, we can't do any of that kind of social gathering that's normal to us in New York City. And so that is taking, I think, a kind of emotional toll on people, but also it's making us more cloistered, more segregated, because those of us who can live indoors, we're continuing to do it. We still get paid. We can do all of our work online. We can engage with our friends online. And we're missing this thing that brought us, or a lot of us, to this city in the first place, which is that the spontaneous kind of social interaction you have just going about day to day doing your business, in public spaces.
It's a rich area. This is a rich area of research. As an urban sociologist, This is what. Oh, of course, you don't want people to be in this situation, but as a researcher yourself, these are the areas that you do research on and to find out what really are the major impacts going forward. And I know that you talked about Germany, which is true. In Europe, the impact in Europe is interesting because the German government is paying, I saw somewhere 80% of salaries for people, perhaps, particularly those in the culture area. That's $1 billion was announced recently by the German government. In France, $5 billion was just announced a couple of months ago for those in the arts. There's a lot going on across Europe at this time. I know that European governments are more involved in their citizens' lives more than American government. Of course, that has to do with the issue of political culture. But with the Biden coming in, you'd expect some kind of social programs to get some boost from the government. You'd expect that what he was talking about, this being another New Deal kind of situation. I would expect him to bring that to fruition. One of the things that I read about was the idea of embedding every policy with climate change. This is going to be very important, but we are starting from a very low base because the current administration just pushed everything to the worst part of, anyway, did a lot to undermine climate change, the fight for climate change, against climate change. And so I don't know to what extent, given his instinct for compromise, the new administration will be. What do you think, Phil? Are you hoping that we shall have a government that is more that can do all the things that we expect it to do with regards to public health, with regards to climate change?
Well, I think, Biden believes in compromise not for its own sake, but as a way of getting things done. I actually read this year, I read his autobiography that he wrote just before he was running back in 2008 or in 2007 when he was still running for president, before he joined Obama's ticket. And it really kind of lays out his philosophy in many ways that he believes in government. He believes in what government can do. I mean, he got involved in politics when he was just entering college because he was really excited by John Kennedy's candidacy, as a lot of people in his generation were. And he's always held on to this idea of government as a force for good. So I think that you will see him pull as many levers of government as he can to try to get things done over the next few years. As I said before, regardless of what the situation is in the Senate. And I think that, he will be up against a philosophy, though, that clearly has capture the Republican Party. I mean, it's always been a strong part of the party over the years, but I think, since the so-called moderates have generally been purged from the party, you see the other idea taken over, and that is the idea that basically government does not work, really ever since Reagan, saying that government is the problem, it's not the solution. And by the way, I recommend anyone to see this Showtime series that is taking a look at Reagan and his career, that they're running every Sunday night. I think it's had 2 episodes already, and there are 2 more.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah. It's a very clear-eyed kind of, not hagiographic in any way. It's really, and it's connecting Reagan to what has been happening in more recent years with Republican leaders. And this idea really dominates the party and dominates the states where the party has control. And I feel the best way to push back against that is to show how effective government can be. That, in that way, making the argument that, we're not talking about big government versus small government. We're talking about government that works for everybody as opposed to only works for a few. So I think if he continues along those lines, I mean, there'll be other tension as Cheryl touched on before, between, you know, the young, the activists, the who are an important, very important part of the party, and, you know, people like, well, I'm thinking of Congresswoman Spanberger from Virginia, who there was this big story about how she was yelling at Pelosi and, you know, the other people in Congress, like, I'll tell you why we lost seats, because, you know, we're talking about socialism and defund the police and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, I don't think that anybody ran on a platform of socialism.
But she's talking about AOC and the squad. And
yeah.
Yes.
No, the problem is that I think the party, as usual, unfortunately, allowed the Republicans to define them in that way as the party of socialism, rather than pushing back and saying, look, we're not talking about turning this country.
Well, I kind of, no, the Republicans call anything that has any kind of like move to a more equitable policy, they call it socialism. They've done it forever. So the idea that people shouldn't go into debt and drop dead because they can't afford healthcare, our solution is some kind of universal healthcare program, or at least a public option. All of that is socialism to the Republican. The fact that, you know, we have COVID and the Republicans are in court trying to throw out Obamacare. I mean, what? That's not socialism. They want death. They're the party of death.
Right. No, don't get me wrong, Cheryl. I agree with you. What I'm saying is that rather than just kind of like, and I said this 2 weeks ago, rather than the response being Biden just kind of, you know, laughing and saying, come on, you think I look like a socialist? He and other candidates should have said more strongly, we're talking about social democracy as practiced in most of Western Europe. We are not talking about Cuba or the former Soviet Union. We're talking about a basic safety net here. There is nothing radical about this. Much of the civilized world already done this. I think they should have done that. You know,
they need to have the Lincoln Project.
The Lincoln Project, they were pretty slick, but I don't know that we're even at a point, Phil, where we can go back to rational dialogue. I feel like younger leaders in, you know, on the Democratic side, they need to reshape the Democratic Party, and they need to articulate what we're trying to do and who we are in new language, because older people can't do it. And I guess that includes all of us, right? We can't do it. No one on the right, come on. Remember we were talking about French fries and, you know, we were having these ridiculous conversations about France and like being rational and saying, hey, look, everybody's going to benefit. That doesn't work with people who don't read, people who believe the lies that they're told by this insane individual in the White House. Being rational doesn't work with them. It's like, you lost the election, guys. No, you stole it. You know, you can't be rational with that.
But you still need to win.
Fight differently.
Don't you still need to win, Angela, and bring in new people from areas that may not like socialism, or rather, I understand some of them may not even know what socialism is in real terms.
They really don't.
In real terms, because socialism is so different. But you need to win. You need Mickey from New Jersey, who is in a very conservative district. You need those Democrats who basically won in Republican districts 4 years ago. So that's their concern about AOC and the squad, and their open call for social democracy. I'm not so sure they're talking about socialism. It's social democracy.
I think they're just used to just throwing that word around. And like you said, a lot of them don't even know the definition of what it is and what all it entails. But I think they just have gotten so accustomed to the bullying that Trump is doing. He's like the guy that came out of that was not a part of politics, and he came from business, and they believe he worked his way up, which he did not. Dad took care of him for a long, long time. But They believe that, you know, he was the underdog, and he came into the system that was not, you know, something that he was used to, and they look up to him as if he's the guy that we want to be. And he like bullied his way into everything, and, you know, has flipped up the whole system and has just been spouting out a lot of different jargons that people who come from a lot of rural areas who will never see themselves in those plays and powers of position, he's the guy that they want to be. So in terms of socialism, a lot of them don't know what that is about. They have no idea to
How do we deal with them, because their understanding of socialism is negative, and you got to explain it, but explaining is so difficult in a political situation. And that, to me, is part of the reason that I thought Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren would never have won this election, um, given where America is. This is not Europe. This is a very conservative country culturally, and so having a kind of a middle of the road person like Biden and middle of the road policies that often do not do very well is one way of keeping Congress so that you can just get back. Phil.
Well, I think, George, it's a dilemma. I can't say. I mean, I think that there is as Angela said, I mean, there was a certain amount of Trump's appeal that was personal based on who he was or what he seemed to represent. And regardless of what happens in the next few years, I mean, we can all hope. I know he's going to be hit with several lawsuits, like the woman he raped 25 years ago is, suing him for defamation. He's being prosecuted in New York for, white collar crime that he may have committed before he was in president. He owes a lot of money to a lot of different people, Deutsche Bank, other banks. But will Trumpism survive him? It might, because the impulses are still there. Many of them, they're not going to go away overnight. And I think I want to return to what Cheryl was saying before. Let me be clear. I really, I work at a university. I see that kind of youthful energy. I saw it before the pandemic. I saw it still expressed online. The young people, I mean, it's wonderful. I can remember, it really takes me back to the good old days of the 60s and 70s when, I was younger than the activists, but I could still really I marched in a couple of demonstrations, like I was like in the Pee Wee division of the anti-war movement there. I see the same kind of energy there, and it's a wonderful thing. And yet, I've read and heard so many comments over the last couple of weeks from people who don't necessarily love Trump, who weren't like part of his cult, but who said things like, look, I'm sick of these Democrats lecturing me. I'm sick of them telling me how morally superior they are. I'm sick of them saying that this country is irredeemably, racist and this and that and the other thing. And I mean, that is going to be, I think, the greatest tension over the next few years, is to how to kind of like thread the needle and say, look, this country needs some serious systemic change on a lot of levels. And yet how to get that message out without saying that, like, we have the answers, we're morally superior, and if you disagree with us, you must be hopelessly bigoted and there's no point in talking to you. And I don't know, because, people on both sides vote. And I think that was at the key to the arguments between Spanberger and AOC about where the party is going to go. And in a larger sense, it's where the country is going to go. And as I say, I don't think, I can't pretend that I have the answer to that, but I think that's going to be the defining struggle for the foreseeable future.
Don't you think, Cheryl, that Trump is laying some kind of wire traps for the Biden administration, not just with the foreign policy, but with COVID? Because the thing is that this is not the first pandemic that we've seen. In fact, if you go into history, we've always had pandemics, and a lot of those are still with us, not in a bad situation like they used to be. We've had salmonella, we've had the yellow fever, we've had so many kinds of pandemics that have come and gone. And it is very difficult. It is very difficult to fight them. And what I fear they're likely to say is that, well, they came in and people still died. And so the Democrats are just as bad as everybody else. What do you think going forward? I know we have a couple of minutes to go, but the idea of how are we going to treat this situation, this COVID situation? It is really bad. A lot of people are dying. 250,000 people dead. That's not something to laugh about. That's really, really bad within a span of about a couple months.
Yeah, I think, Biden just has a lot of work to do. I think there's been a reckoning across the country, people who thought that they didn't have to follow the mask protocols, that they didn't have to socially distance. I think a lot of people now are realizing, they have to take this seriously. They're vulnerable. I mean, culturally, I don't know if Biden's the one, and I hope he is, to really make Americans feel their common humanity and their common vulnerability to this, and that, we will all benefit if we pull together and follow some protocols and agree, to make certain changes in the way we're conducting business and the way we're educating kids, and be consistent. If he can do that, he'll get us out. The deaths, I mean, they were already in progress. I don't see how anybody could blame an incoming administration for people who are very sick now dying in January and February, which is going to happen. Mm-hmm. They're sick now for a reason, and it has nothing to do with Biden.
And then also, addition to that, the supplies that was not even given to the hospital administrations, and they're still lacking supplies.
Yes, I have a friend who's a lawyer in London. Do you know where she gets most of her money? Shipping PPE from the West Coast of America to London. Incidentally, that is one of the best ways to make money. And you don't need to be a lawyer.
Well, again, that's because Trump did not intervene in the markets as the largest purchaser representing the federal government to make sure that states and local governments had these resources, mm-hmm. and that they were purchased at a reasonable price instead of the extortionary prices that states and local governments were paying. That's why all of these people, these individuals, can come in and cash out like that. You hear these stories all over the place. There was somebody on Long Island that got into trouble that had like a warehouse of yes. gloves and remember So, and that's because of Trump. The Trump administration could have early on intervened in the market and made sure that these resources were available to states and local governments that just happened to be on the East Coast at the time when the worst part of the pandemic was occurring.
Well, he doesn't like New York. He doesn't like New York. He says,
well, he's not welcome back in New York.
Well, he's gone to Mar-a-Lago, and but
good riddance.
His daughter and his son are back, except that they have to look for new friends, because apparently they've been told that you're not going to be in my Zoom, you're not going to be going to the Met. Yeah, so
next year, yeah.
They will be welcomed back by society. Money is money, and they will be welcomed back.
Yes,
and that's why, like, Phil, I don't know, like when you were talking about the Trump supporters and how diverse they are. Sure, everybody's diverse. We all vote for candidates for different reasons. But you step back and you think about the coalitions that come together to elect candidates or presidents. They just seem so different and so fractured today. They seem less similar than when I was a child, and maybe that's just because I was a child, but it's like the idea that a Jewish person who's angry about anti-Israel policies from the Obama administration could pair up with a white nationalist who is anti-Semitic, and then elect Trump, who speaks out of both sides. That's just insane to me. Like, there's something wrong. We need this whole conditioning of thinking about ourselves politically as a society. It's weird to me.
Well, it seems absurd. I hear you, although I would point out that historically, the Democratic Party, was obviously, the party, most black people voted for Democrats, and so did the worst Southern racists in the South. And somehow, talk about an absurd coalition. But I think that the current Republican coalition, if you want to call it that, a lot of it is just that people are maybe, and maybe this is a societal thing, people are thinking more about narrow self-interest, their particular niche. And if a party answers their particular niche desire or interest, that's what they're going to go for, and they don't care about people who might be totally opposed to them.
I get that. I get that's how we do politics. It's not enough to sustain parties anymore. We're too fractured. Those narrow interests are too narrow. They're too narrow.
Do we have one culture then? We have so many different cultures. It's very difficult to put them back. Is that the argument?
Yeah. Listen, maybe someday, maybe in the not too distant future, we'll have 4 parties in this country. We'll have,
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, left Democrats, moderate Democrats, what's left of the moderate or never Trump Republicans, and the other Republicans. Or maybe you'll have a mainstream, quote unquote, conservative party and a white nationalist party. I don't know. We may be coming towards that. It may be that the 2-party structure as we know it is doomed. But nobody knows anything at this point. It's going to be very interesting. Either way.
What a great conversation. That was great. Thank you. And check out YouTube for our next episode. Don't forget to comment, share, and subscribe.